All right, so 23 is definitely a weakening question, right? We're all cool with that. And what is the conclusion? Because the conclusion is what we need to weaken, ultimately, right? Anyone? Huh? Their theory is refuted. Now, the thing about this conclusion is that by itself, it's kind of useless, right? So we have to figure out what their theory is and then say that that theory sucks. So what's their theory? Yes?
Checking for the right question. We're on 23, right?
23, yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Hannah?
That the theory about the deep carbon deposits is wrong.
Yes, so a lot of people think that petroleum comes from dinosaurs, which is what I honestly thought, right? But they say, no, it comes from these deep carbon deposits from a long time ago, right? And then why does this person think that theory is wrong?
Because there are biomarkers in petroleum, which indicates that petroleum must have had, or there must have still been some living organism in petroleum.
Yeah, the past or present existence of a living organism. Okay, so we have the, wait, is it in the petroleum itself? Yes, okay, so you have petroleum. Yeah, here's petroleum, and in it we have biomarkers. And those biomarkers tell us that there was the past or present presence or existence of living organisms. Okay, does that mean that this petroleum came from dinosaurs and plants? What could be true? It could still have come from the carbon deposits, but what's the case? Anyone?
There's biomarkers in the carbon deposits.
If there's biomarkers, we know there's biomarkers in those carbon deposits, and if there are biomarkers, according to the premises, which we have to accept as true, what is true? Kelly?
I was just going to answer your question that it could have come from something else as opposed to plants or animals.
Okay. Maybe the carbon deposits had living things in them and are not responsible for the petroleum, right? But the petroleum still came from the carbon deposits, came from something else, right? Something came into those carbon deposits. Just because there were living things there doesn't mean that the source is no longer the deep carbon deposits, right? That's the assumption here, is that because something was living in the petroleum, it must be that the petroleum itself came from the dinosaurs. All right, anyways. Answers that we were debating. A, E, D, C, B. Let's just talk about all of them. A, fossils have been discovered that are devoid of biomarkers. Okay, so you find a fossil, and what happens? There's no biomarker there, right? So I think that we interpret this as something that's attacking the premise, which you can't really do, but it doesn't actually attack the premise. If there's no biomarker in something that we know is a living thing, does that mean that when you have a biomarker, it's not necessarily a living thing? You see, like the flipped reasoning here. Basically, what they said in the premises was that biomarkers proved there was a living thing there. Okay, that does not mean that if you find a living thing that doesn't have a biomarker, that undermines that idea. Right? Like, it's sort of like false positive sort of thing. We don't need to go down that road. But the bottom line is, just because a living thing doesn't have a biomarker doesn't mean that when you do have a biomarker, it's not a living thing. It could still be a living thing, always. It's just some living things don't have biomarkers. But all biomarkered things are living. Okay, anyways. So A just doesn't do anything with the premises. It doesn't even matter because we don't usually attack premises anyway. So it's out. E. Some carbon deposits were formed from the fossilized remains of plants. Okay, somewhere. But this person is talking about the deep carbon deposits dating from the formation of the Earth, right? And those could still exist and be responsible for petroleum. Are we okay with that? The vast majority could still come from deep carbon deposits that were not formed.
I almost picked E, but I decided not to because it said some, and I felt like some does not weaken it the most, does not weaken an argument.
Yeah, if it said all carbon deposits were formed from the fossilized remains of plants, then it'd sort of be like plants led to these deposits, and then these deposits maybe led to petroleum. So ultimately, it was about the plants or something like that, right? But this is just some,
Some.
at least one. So there's a drop out there in Arizona that was formed from the fossilized remains of plants. Doesn't do much. Okay, D. Certain, which means some, also weak. Some strains of bacteria thrive deep inside the Earth's crust. Oh, so maybe that's why there are biomarkers in this, in these coal. What are they again? They're carbon deposits. Again, just because there's something there that's living there doesn't necessarily mean that it was dinosaurs and plants. Are we okay with that?
We didn't even know that deep carbon deposits are located in the Earth's crust. Like that's why, like.
Oh, well, it says deep carbon deposits dating from the formation of the Earth. And it says deep in the Earth's crust, actually, in the first sentence.
Yeah, but that's in reference to where the fossilized remains are. Now where they keep, like in my mind, I had an idea of like there's fossilized remains that are like in the Earth's crust, and then you also have like deep carbon deposits that are like in another place. And just like maybe I'm just like reading too much into it. But, like,
Oh, yeah, we are making the assumption that in that same sentence when they say deep carbon deposits,
are located in the same place.
that they're located in the crust. I don't know much about the crust of the Earth, but yes?
I thought it was saying that the petroleum was located deep in Earth's crust.
Okay, yeah, let's take a look. So the dominant view of that petroleum formed from the fossilized remains of plants and animals deep in the Earth's crust has been challenged by scientists who hold that it formed, but from deep carbon deposits. I mean, that it is referring to the petroleum. And if it is deep in the Earth's crust, and someone is making this claim about carbon deposits, then presumably those carbon deposits are in the same place. I mean, maybe there's an assumption here, but I don't think it's a big one, given the fact that petroleum is there. So Christian, what'd you end up picking?
Like,
You see what's wrong with A?
yeah, I mean, I like just the idea that you're not supposed to attack premises. But other than that, like they all seem kind of weak. Like they were all weak to me. So
Yeah.
I just picked the one that was like seemed to be like the least of the weak ones.
Yeah, unfortunately A is just flipped. I think understanding that attacks premises is important, but it ultimately is not even doing that, right? Because if biomarkers prove that a living thing was there, when you come across something that is living, or you know was living, and it doesn't have a biomarker, that doesn't mean that the presence of biomarkers doesn't mean anything. Basically it's a false contrapositive. If biomarkers prove living, that doesn't mean that the lack of biomarkers means it wasn't living. That would be a false contrapositive. So you could have a lack of biomarkers with things that were living. Okay, any other questions on this one? Yes?
Just a general, so when you're saying about attacking the premises, that obviously we shouldn't do it with the but with these weakened ones, that's what I'm usually looking for. And I kind of fall for anything that kind of, are we not supposed to look for prompts that blatantly undermine the premise rather just find where?
Yeah, so a prompt that undermines the premise, well, they're actually almost never going to do it. So if you feel like it's undermining a premise or contradicting a premise, you're probably misreading it.
Okay.
What you
So
do
then
need
it's
to,
not gonna be like, well, if this is true, we're just gonna like, yeah, just flip whatever.
yeah, they're not going to say like you should vote for the mayor or you shouldn't vote for the mayor because he's always been involved in corruption. And then like B is like the mayor has not always been involved in corruption. Like they don't provide those kind of answers. But what we are attacking is the assumptions. And assumptions are unstated premises. So sometimes it might feel like you're attacking a premise, but really you're attacking an unstated premise. And that's totally fine. That happens all the time. Yeah. Okay.